Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chiseled. And why do we call it Chiseled? Because we're all work in progress. I'm Rob Commodari. I'm your host. I'm also the author of Better Than You Think, and I had co-authored a book with several people, Next Level Your Life. And through that, I met this person, our guest today, Stormy Hill, all the way from Salt Lake City, Utah, who also has residency in Costa Rica, and she's an intimacy coach. And she's been an intimacy coach for 3 years, but she's been in the medical field for some 14 years. Is that correct? Is that correct, Stormy?
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. So, Stormy, welcome to the show. We're going to talk about God, faith, and sexuality today, and I'm excited to talk to you about that. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, Stormy.
So honored to be here. Thanks, Rob, for having me. Really just excited to share some time with you. So yeah, my background was I always had an interest in the brain and in mental health and wellness, and did that as in my medical doctorate, and then went on to become an occupational therapist. I've done that for the last 14 years in mental health and substance use disorder, so dual diagnosis, teaching mindfulness and life skills and building these beautiful sensory rooms. And kind of through that, just my nerdy brain that loves the brain and loves our senses and how we create and experience pleasure in all areas of our life really set me more on this path to do the intimacy coaching. And so about 3 years ago, I decided to do it officially, did a 650-hour certification program, and I have 3 businesses, and one of them is the coaching. And I feel like, besides being a mom to an amazing 19-year-old young man, that this work in the coaching and intimacy coaching is my purpose for being on this earth. So,
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think part of this journey for you is related to your son. Is that correct?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think, my son has autism. He's 19 and he's off on the other side of the country. I'm in Utah. He's in Florida, thriving, just finished his first year of college, just brought him home for the summer about a week or two ago. And so, but it was interesting, sort of a mom world collision with my professional world collision was I was actually studying. My focus in graduate school for the second time when I went to graduate school was on autism. That was about 3-4 months before my son was diagnosed with autism. So that was sort of a serendipitous thing. And I will tell you, having the book knowledge of autism is very different than having getting to experience the joys and challenges of raising a kiddo with autism. But my worlds quickly collided, and that sort of really set me off on the path of learning everything I can about the brain and how we process our sensory input and how we just regulate ourselves in this world. I mean, I say the only thing that's for sure coming is another hiccup, another bump in the road. And so how do we learn to navigate that more successfully?
So there are challenges, as we all know, correct?
Yep, guaranteed.
So I'm sure there's some people, when they hear an intimacy coach, they're like, "Oh, what's this going to be about?" Right? We're talking about God, faith, and intimacy, right? And I believe my thought would be most people, when they hear the word intimacy, they think of sex. And I know there is something to do with that, with sex and intimacy and relationships, and we're going to talk about that. But how we incorporate that with God and our faith. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was so beautifully said what you just said there, right? We tend to be very myopic in how we view intimacy. When we say intimacy, or when we read something or hear something about intimacy, we automatically think of intimacy in the bedroom. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about teaching, just to the masses, but also to the clients that I coach, I work with men, women, and couples in the coaching, is that intimacy is really broad. Intimacy has so many different realms to it. And when we're so myopic about it, when we only think about intimacy in the bedroom, we're missing this huge experience of depth, of vulnerability, of deep connection, to ourselves, to our higher power. For me, it's God. Like, so my connection to God, my connection to my son, my connection to my partner, my romantic partner. So when we're really myopic about intimacy, we're really kind of only looking at like one little piece of the intimacy pie, so to speak. And so I love to teach on different kinds of intimacy and how do we cultivate and curate experiences to foster intimacy. And I say from the boardroom to the bedroom, right? So in all parts of our life. And so, and even with pleasure, same thing. We tend to be really myopic when we say pleasure. We think of pleasure that occurs in sexuality, and that is just one type of pleasure. And I have this joke that my desire in lifetime, my moniker is a pleasure pusher, because I really want to help people learn to really consciously, thoughtfully, and kindly exercise that pleasure muscle to be able to have more joy, more pleasure, more vibrancy in all parts of life. And then when I'm working with couples, to help them continue having that in the bedroom and in their sexuality as well.
So outside the bedroom, how does a couple or a person create intimacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really, I like the different, depending on who you're reading, which model, there's different realms of intimacy, they call it. And I really like to think about 9 different realms, and we won't go into every single realm, but one of them is spiritual intimacy. So how do you connect, first of all, yourself? What is your spiritual practice? How do you connect to your higher power? And again, for me, that's my closest relationship is my relationship to God. My most important relationship in my life is my relationship to God. And so how do I curate that? How do I cultivate that? What's my practice? What's my routine? What's my commitment? What's my discipline on that? And then, so first and foremost, my own spirituality. And then how do I connect to my partner's spirituality and help foster and facilitate their connection to their spirituality? And then this is the part I get so excited about. How do we bring that intimacy, the spirituality, the seeing the divine in ourselves and in our partner into the bedroom? And that's what I call sacred sexuality. How do we practice sexuality in a way that's really sacred? And our culture does not promote that, right? We have a lot of very disruptive messaging when it comes to sex and sexuality. And so it's one of the things I really love to teach. I love to practice myself. I mean, I was thinking about being on this podcast with you, and I'm like, it's so interesting. I was talking with a pastor about this, that I always say, like, God could have had us procreate in any way, but he gave us the gift of sex. He gave us the beautiful gift of sex. And so even thinking of sex as a gift is a huge shift, right? And not having it be separate from feeling your connection to God. And I was just reading, I actually just did a podcast on sacred sexuality that aired today, ironically, on my podcast. But what I read the study, that was a Christian study, and it was 44 couples, and it was about when they were practicing sacred sexuality, what did they experience? And they said they experienced bliss. They experienced hearing from God, being able to be more attuned with God while they were practicing intimacy with their partner. And obviously that's very different than just having sex be something we don't talk about, sex be something we don't communicate about. And so it's a major shift in how we approach sexuality. And I think it's a really beautiful, really powerful one.
So how does one find intimacy with themselves first, and then, because it's like you got to love yourself first before you can learn to love others. So how do you find intimacy with yourself, and then how do you learn to find intimacy with your partner? And then, because I think it's yourself, your partner, and then you bring it together, and I think you can have a dynamic relationship like that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of really back to those realms, right? So I always say, for me, it's God as my beloved, then myself as my beloved, and then my partner as my beloved, in that order for me, right? And this is an individual process. It's not that way for everyone, but for me, that's how I love best, right? My North Star is my relationship with God. That has to be intact. I have to feel good about that. I have to be practiced in that. Then my relationship with myself, just like you said, Rob, it has to start with yourself, right? And that's all of it. That's self-confidence, that's self-love, that's learning to feel bliss and pleasure in your own life, not in the bedroom, separate from the bedroom. And then if we expect our partner to be our only source of, let's say, happiness or bliss or pleasure, that is a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah, right.
Because we're looking outside of ourselves for something that God's already put inside of us, right? I think there's a book that happiness is an inside job, and it's true, right? It really is. So, when you ask, how do we cultivate that? I think looking at these different, our own practice, our own relationship with God, our own practice with ourselves, right? So self-reflection, self-confrontation. How do we work on ourselves to be a better version of ourselves? I hope I'm growing and evolving to my last breath, right? It's like that growth mindset, having that growth mindset in life, in love, in sex, in relationships, and then hopefully your partner. We can't make our partner come along, but we can do the work ourselves, and then we can invite them into a different way of relating. And so, when I'm working with a couple, if we're working, let's say, specifically on sexual intimacy, we talk about, how's their relationship like with their body? How do they resolve conflict? How do they repair and restore after conflict? So there's something called conflict intimacy, right? How do you navigate conflict? And not only navigate the conflict, how do you repair and restore after conflict? So there's all these different types of intimacy that play into having a deep, vulnerable, heartfelt, heart open, mind open connection with your partner.
So now you have the connections with each other, and then you can celebrate that, as they say, in the bedroom, right?
Totally. if that's where it goes, right? And that's like, I mean, even physical intimacy is different than sexual intimacy. So how do you, maybe your partner's love language is physical touch. So how do you speak in their love language? How do you show gestures of love and affection? These are not sexual gestures of love and affection, they're physical. They might be sensual, right? So knowing your partner's love language is certainly a great tool to start with, because the idea is that you could be showing gestures of love, and if it's not in your partner's love language, it won't land for them. And to me, that represents intimacy. You're bringing a spirit of curiosity to understanding, how does your partner best feel loved? How does it land most deeply for them? And a lot of that has to do with our attachment style and our family of origin and so many other things. But how does your partner best feel loved? And then doing things in that way that land for your partner, that's incredibly intimate.
So then learning myself and learning my partners, like would attract some of their love language, or the intimacy language, let's call it that. And now I get up in the morning and maybe my wife or partner wants to have a cup of coffee, and we can share our intimacies over a cup of coffee. Is that possible? How does that look like?
Absolutely, right? So you're talking about, in the love language world, you're talking about quality time there, maybe acts of service if you make your partner their cup of coffee, or whatever it might be for the two of you. But, there's a reason Gary Chapman's book is so famous, is because it is so spot on about how we feel and can take in love, and that's different. So, learning, take this free online quizzes, find out your love language, find out your partner's love language, read the book. There's tons of workbooks out there on the 5 love languages, but it's a great tool to build intimacy, because and again, I really bring intimacy back to a spirit of curiosity, right? And think about your relationship, at least my relationship with God, became much deeper and much more intimate when I brought curiosity to like learning about my faith and wrestling with my faith, and what did my faith, I grew up Catholic, but what did that look like for me as an adult versus for me as a child, right? How did I want to have an adult relationship with God, right? And so there's an absolute intimacy there. And so when you think about like the Greek types of love, right? There's 7 of them, but let's just look at like phileos, agape, and eros. God didn't say, oh, everything but eros, right?
Right.
Right. So he didn't say everything but romantic love. And in Genesis, when he says the man will leave his family and take a wife and become one flesh, he doesn't say 2 fleshes who occasionally get together. It's one flesh, right? He's, So I always say God gave us the gift of sex. Let's learn to practice it in that way, right?
So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So then let's change gears a little bit and talk about this intimacy with God, right? So we all have different ways, whether it's praying, meditating, so on and so forth. So in your coaching world, how do you coach an intimacy with God?
Yeah, and I work with people of different faiths, and I work with a lot of the couples that find me are Christian, but not all of them. My relationship is my relationship with God, my North Star relationship. But for me, I can say that like even it shifted for me in my 20s. It was very much I felt closest to God in church. That was probably from my growing up Catholic. Well, for whatever reasons, it was the reality, and in song, particularly in song in church for me. And then in my 30s, when I found and fell in love with the mountains, and I am a mountain girl through and through, I feel closest to God when I'm hiking in the mountains alone, praying as I'm hiking, right? Meditating, praying that is when, I just got full body chills as I said that. That's for me where I feel closest to God. I have my best conversations with God. I can hear what you talked about. I've heard you talk about, Rob, is like, I can hear God and his insight, his nudging way more clearly in the mountains than sitting at my desk, right? That's my relationship. Yeah. So getting curious about where do you feel closest to God? How do you feel closest to God, or your higher power if it's not God, but like whatever it is for you, for me, it's absolutely God. And so how do you curate that? And so now I create a life where I get into the mountains a lot because I'm seeking that intimacy. I am a better person, partner, lover, mother, all the things when my relationship with God is more intimate.
Yeah, we were just in Yosemite Park not too long ago. And last year we were in Yellowstone, or the Grand Tetons. My wife and I celebrated our 25th anniversary in Colorado mountains.
Amazing.
And like my friends call me Nature Boy, right? I love being in nature, and that's where I have my connection as well. And I feel like, I'm in this world of nature, and I'm like, God created this. I'll never forget in fact, it was in the book, the chapter of the book I wrote in Kyle
Mhm.
Wilson's book. We were in the Grand Canyon, hiked the Grand Canyon, 7.5 miles down and back up. My buddy says to me, what was your experience like in the Grand
Mhm.
Canyon? And I said it was incredible, but I got choked up and I started crying, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, it was an amazing spiritual experience for me in a sense that, and I guess part of what led to that, I'm sidetracking right now, is right when we got to the Grand Canyon, I dropped my phone and break it. And
Wow.
I can't take any pictures, right? And I'm like,
Oh.
God, why would you do this to me, man? I'm the first time ever in the Grand Canyon, and you're letting my phone break, right? And then in an instant, I'm like, God doesn't want me to see His creation or His allness with the
Mm,
lens of this phone. He wants
mm,
me to see with the lens of His eyes or my eyes.
mhm.
And in that instant, I'm like, all right, God, it's you and me. We're hiking this thing. And like I said, when I got out, my friend asked me what the experience was. I start bawling, man. And I said
Mm.
to him, I said, if this is just a glimmer of what heaven's about, I can't wait to die. Now, I don't want to die tomorrow, but I'm looking forward to seeing that
Yeah,
rawness and that beauty and that greatness. And so
yeah,
nature is my connection, right? And
right.
I get that connection there. And every morning I have 15, 20 minutes of quiet time. So
Mhm.
that's what I do. So are there other like for you, it's nature. Are there other strategies, tactics that you would tell people to try to find to get this intimacy with God?
Yeah, I think it's like, I mean, whether and in my mind, my lived experience is like God's like, just be intimate with me, however you do it, right? I'm giving you all these tools to connect with me. So find which ones resonate with your heart, right? Like it's still song for me too. I love song. I mean, I had a nanny that was Southern Baptist, and so she like got me into gospel, and I would actually got like in trouble in Catholic school for like swaying and like clapping and whooping it up, and they had like my mom had to go and talk to the nuns because they're like, Stormy needs to stand still, and she's like, maybe you need to like sway a little bit, so
Uh-huh.
but that was a gift from her name was Margaret, from Margaret for me, that I feel very connected to God in gospel through gospel music, and so get this is what I tell my son too, because my son with autism is very black and white. He's like, very once he's like, Mom, how do you know without a doubt that God is real, right? And he's talking about scientifically, because this is how his non-neurotypical mind, his neurodivergent mind thinks. And I said, Mason, there at some point there's a reason we call it faith, right? There's a reason it's called faith. It's a feeling, it's a deep knowing. So find your deep knowing, right? Find your like, there is no doubt, right, place for you. And that's going to be different for everyone. Some people it's in church. Some people it's in prayer. Some people it's in Bible study. Some people it's out in nature. It could be all of these combinations of it. But if you think about really having a deep, intimate relationship with God, that has questioning, that has depth, that has curiosity, that has experience, that has even playfulness with it, right? That's what cultivates intimacy. Those qualities don't only extend to like having great sex or having a great relationship. That's about intimacy in all parts of your life. And for me, that intimacy has to start with God.
That's awesome. And so if I can go off tangent a little bit, because talk a little bit about your son, right? Because you talk about faith
Mm-hmm.
and your son's going through some stuff. And if you want to share that, please do.
Yeah.
And you had to have faith. You had to and have to have faith to keep going where you're going. So would you like to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I think, one place for me that where my relationship with God became much more intimate was my son was diagnosed with a really rare heart disease when he was 3 months old, and he was in stage 4 heart failure, very much, precarious of being on this earth for very long, in and out of heart failure the first 18 months of his life. And I was so pissed at God at the beginning. Like, well, at first I was in the first like, please let it be me. I'll switch, right? Like the whole bargaining
Yeah, yeah.
stage of grieving. Please, like, take me, take me, take me. Don't take my baby, which is totally normal in the stages of grieving. And then anger, another stage of grieving. I went through that, and I was like, God, how could you? This is my baby. Like I did in vitro. I had to work really hard to get pregnant, and I was and then my mother, who is a very devout Catholic, was like, honey, wrestle with God. God can take it. Like, and I remember I would go run. I was very big in running, and I'd go run so hard that I couldn't even like feel any sadness or worry. And I would just pray and pray and pray and cry and cry and cry. And I was out running. This is a snowy day in Michigan in January. And so my son's about a year old, and I remember what the road looked like, and I'm just wrestling. I mean, I'm angry at God, and I'm like just talking, and I'm like, but I'm talking so much, I'm not listening, right? And then I literally heard God say, Stormy, get over yourself. We never know when we're going to lose. I know, but you never know when I'm going to take your child.
Mhm.
It is no different for you with a very sick child than it is for anyone at any time. We don't know when we're going to lose our spouse. We don't know when we're going to lose anyone, right? Or when God's going to call someone home. We don't know. And so it was this God literally saying, you need to let go. You have to surrender this, right? You have to trust. And that moment, it's so funny. I remember running in and telling my husband, waking him up and saying, everything's going to be okay. Like I had this whole God moment, and he was like, he didn't have it. So he's like, what are you talking about? And so that was a really powerful, intimate moment for me that allowed me to loosen my grip on trying to hoard moments with my son, because the reality is we can't hoard moments. We can just cherish them. We can't actually collect moments, right? And so when I loosened the grip on trying to holding on so tightly, which was impacting me, impacting my marriage, impacting my parenting, definitely impacting my son, to grab on that tightly. So when I surrendered some of that control, that was when my relationship with God became more deep. And I knew that no matter what, even if my son were going to be going home, that I would be okay, that it would be okay. And that was so far beyond my human capacities. I can't even begin to share. So.
Yeah, and I like what you said, or your mother said, that wrestle with God. I love
Mhm.
that, because I think there's people out there that think, okay, I'm not allowed to question God. I'm not allowed to come from that place of curiosity, like why this, why that, or even I'm not allowed to be pissed or mad at God, right?
Right.
So talk to me about that. One, I think you know what the answer is, but go a little bit deeper with it. Is it okay to be pissed and be angry at God?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's I think of God as the ultimate father, right? The archetypal father. It's well, I think what my mom says about parenting, if you're doing a good job parenting, your kids are going to be pissed off at you at times, right?
Right.
And so I think it's yeah, wrestle with it. And I've had a couple times in my life where I really wrestled with something hard, because what happened was I was putting it on God, right? Until the shift happens that God gave us the blessing and the curse of free will, right? And there's all these things that happen, and something hard things just happen. Evil is out there, right? And so, but that it will be God that helps you through it, and that was a big shift for me. So I would say, yeah. I mean, my advice would be wrestle with God. He asks for an intimate relationship. He wants an intimate relationship with you, and intimacy absolutely starts with your relationship with God, and then goes into all other parts of your life. And there's a quote that says, we can only meet someone else to the depths that we've met ourselves. And so that's this kind of investigative work that you do with yourself, with God, that will allow you to have deeper intimacy, deeper vulnerability with all the people in your life, all the close relationships in your life.
Yeah, I think that's profound, because, I think we can all get angry or get pissed, but in that, and we use the term wrestling, because when you're
Mm-hmm.
angry, when you're pissed, you are wrestling with it,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that situation is, the hurt, the injury, whatever it is, you're wrestling with it. And I think we get closer to God when we question Him, because
Mm-hmm.
then at some point, I think He gives us the answers if we listen. And the way to listen is to get a little closer, and to get a little
Right.
closer, and to get a
Right.
little closer. And
Absolutely.
that's yeah. So it's good stuff. The so you talked about your son, and you said we met in Dallas. We met in
Mm-hmm.
Dallas, a couple months ago, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was, and you were talking about your son and how he came to that moment, right? You said it a couple minutes ago, and that had an impact on you, though. You told me it had an impact on you.
Mm-hmm.
Go a little further on that, because I know you talked about what he said, but go a little further on that, how it impacted you.
Yeah, I mean, so he is wrestling with it right now, right? He's 19. He's neurodivergent. He's brilliant. His IQ's twice mine, literally. And so he's wrestling with it. And I said, honey, wrestle with it. Ask questions, read books, talk to people. Go try different expressions of your faith, right? And find out what your North Star is. Find out what resonates with you, but wrestle with it, right? And I actually even suggested, I was read Stephen Hawking, because he's so brilliant. He was a I would say, an evangelical atheist of some sorts till the end of his life, where he was like, there is something that science has proven scientifically that science can't prove, right? And I think about my son, he's a walking miracle, which I'll share that funny story in a second, but yet he's struggling with how to believe in miracles. So I said to him, you are literally a walking miracle. Science would say you should not be on this earth. Like, research would say with the disease that you have and the stage that it was in, you should not be on this earth. This was when he was 3 months old. He's now 19. And so I said to him, I was like, you're like a walking miracle. And his response was, that's a lot of pressure.
That's what it was. That's what it was right there.
So, but I said, yeah, well, it's still the case, right? So I just think it's such an interesting, and I like, and he said, Mom, would you be disappointed in me if I not sure what I believe? And I said, no, I mean, welcome to mother's or parents' fierce love, right? It's like, I'm like, but wrestle with it, ask questions, don't settle for not knowing what you believe, not exploring what you believe. And you are literally walking proof of a miracle.
Yeah. Yeah. So you said he asked you, is it okay that I feel that way, right? I don't want to disappoint you.
Mm-hmm.
In the same breath, don't we sometimes ask God those same questions?
Totally. That's exactly right.
Shouldn't we ask those questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely, right. And what does God? I mean, my when I listen to God, he's always like, "You go do your thing, and I'll be right here waiting for you." Right, like that constant, that steady, that source, that North Star in my life. And I haven't always been on a straight path to my North Star. I was like, went all weary and all around and explored all different things. And my experience was God was always there to be like, I'm ready. I'm right here when you're ready. I'm right here when you come back. And that's why I say the North Star, right? And I was trying to teach my son. I said, your North Star doesn't change. It doesn't matter which direction you're heading. The North Star is always north.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. So you talked about a few minutes ago about hoarding the moments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And God said to you, hey, you got to get over yourself. And so I live for the moment, right? I love the moments, and I experience joy in the moment. And so it's hard, like you talked about surrendering and get over yourself, stop hoarding the moments. That's a hard thing to do because like I have a good moment and a joyful moment and I don't want to let it go. But you have to, because if you don't let it go, you can't have the next one, correct?
Right. That's really well said, right? Like, and I think there's this like grasping quality, right? We by design, like negative things imprint our brain. By God's design, negative things imprint our brain more deeply. It's a way to like keep us safe, like survival, like back in evolution, back when our brains were evolving, and yet so that it's going to imprint more deeply. So the negative things are going to leave a lasting impact in your life. And so you can choose to focus on those, or so by design, you're going to want to be like, oh, this moment's really sweet and yummy, and I'd like to stay only in this moment, right?
Right.
Or I'd like a lot more of this moment. And that's totally normal. It's totally natural. It's totally neurologically based. And the practice, for me, I believe is that surrender piece of like knowing that the next moment is coming. It might be better, it might be worse, it might be anywhere in between, but it is coming. The next moment's going to come, and it will always change, right? So like when you feel, which I have felt many times in my life, when we feel a grasping onto something, then it's an opportunity to like lean into that surrender, right? And that allows you to also know that even in hard moments, this too shall pass, right? This too shall pass. I can only tell you the only thing about emotions is that they will change, right? Which is why I don't think love is an emotion. I think it's a force, right? It's like, it is not, if it's practiced well, it's not an emotion, it's a force, right?
So if you allow yourself to experience those moments and feel fulfilled in that moment, does that bring you closer to God? Does that bring you a more intimacy?
Yeah, I think absolutely, right? It's about presence, right? Like to be really present with the moment, whether it's amazing or hard or everything in between. And that is not easy. This is a practice, right? It's really, but let's think about relational intimacy with your love partner. I always say, I'm not even that interested in how it is when things are awesome, because anyone can get along when things are awesome. How is your intimacy when things are really hard? when things are stressful, when you're angry, when stuff has gone wrong, when you're stressed out, when you're hangry, whatever you are.
Angry.
Like, right? When I was dating my partner, we've been together 5 years, I literally was like, I'm not even interested until we have our first conflict. And he was like, what? Because I wasn't even interested like in the longevity potential of the relationship until I saw how we navigated conflict. Because there is, like I said, there's the intimacy, conflict intimacy. Can you lean in towards each other when you're angry? And the answer is yes, you can. It's a practice, right? We tend to want to lean away, but if you want to build intimacy with your partner, you lean in when you want to lean away.
So how do you do that? How do you lean in?
It's a great question. I mean, I'm a big nervous system fan. That's what I like study and teach. And so our nervous system is an incredible way to give us the tools to lean in when everything in our instinct is telling us to either lean out or run out, right?
Right.
So calming your nervous system, taking some really slow, deep breaths, right? Really, I mean, scientifically, neurologically will calm your nervous system. Will also, interestingly enough, sync up your nervous system more with your partner. Right? Because what happens, let's say your partner's up at a 10 out of 10, like they're really maybe, let's say angry, okay, but they're really, maybe they're sad or anxious, but they're really something. They're 10 out of 10 something that is not, what we call positive. You have to upregulate your nervous system to connect with them. If you're down at a 1, you're not even going to be on the same like playing field, right? So you are going to upregulate your nervous system, and then the repair and restore is how do you both calm your nervous systems back down and stay connected, right? And so, I think the one key to that is breath, but also noticing when you want to run out of the room energetically or literally, right? Yeah. Noticing when you're in defensiveness, when you're in blame, when you're in name calling, all these tactics that we can use when we're hurt, when we're scared, when we want to run out of the room, either literally or figuratively. And so noticing that, taking some deep breaths and choosing to lean in to be, and another way to do it is to bring curiosity to your partner. It's a great challenge to couples to say, next time you're in conflict, can you stay curious about your partner's experience, about their reactions, about maybe the hurt or the anger or whatever it is. But the answer is that you can, but you have to practice it, right? Because the opposite of defensive is curious, right? So when we stay curious, it will keep us out of defensiveness. And so it's hard, right? It's a hard practice, but I think it's very aligned with your intimacy with God, like leaning in, wrestling, staying curious, asking questions, right? Keeps us out of this whole, I can do it on my own, right? Which we might have had that with God. Like, I don't need you, I can do it on my own. We certainly probably have had it with our partner, this, I don't need you, I can do it on my own sort of feeling. And these are all things that keep us and move us out of intimacy. And one of the things I love to teach, and I certainly do not do it perfectly at all myself, but it's a daily practice for me, is how do I lean in? How do I build more trust, more vulnerability, more depth of connection, and not cause a chasm in the relationship?
So when you say you practice that every day, do you practice it with your partner, or do you practice it like talking to yourself? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. For me, like my practice, so I have a prayer meditation. My exercise, like I said, in the mountains is my time with God. Most of the time I'm by myself. Sometimes I hike with friends, but it's usually a solo practice. And then, my partner and I practice. We'll have intimacy practices, right? Whether that's a conversation or a breathwork practice, and we will literally practice, right? And none of these are sexual practices. They might be sensual, they might be physical, they might be conflict, they might be recreational intimacy. It's another type of intimacy. Go out and do something fun together, laugh and play. To me, God gave us all these things. He didn't say we have to just sit across from each other and have conversations. He gave us playfulness. He gave us laughter. He gave us games, all these things that we don't do. I work with children in one of my OT businesses, and kids are so inspiring how they learn and explore the world through play. And somehow as adults, we sort of forgot that.
Yeah, right.
So, but that's a great way to recreational intimacy, intellectual intimacy. Find something that neither of you know anything about and learn about it together. It gives all these opportunities for connection, for conversation, for curiosity. And then, I think if you want to continue to even bring into sexuality, into the sacredness, bring in a spirit of adoration and devotion to your partner. When was the last time you held your partner's hand with devotion?
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
When was the last time you kissed their lips with devotion, right? We're not talking about sex. I'm talking about holding hands and kissing,
Yeah.
with adoration and devotion. I mean, it gives me the goosebumps every time I say it. It will be, I promise you, it will be a totally different kind of a kiss,
Wow, I like that. So if my wife's listening to this, watch out.
I love it.
And she will be listening to this at some point. So
Totally.
then she's going to know what I'm up to. Because so go back to like one person's at a 10, the other person's at 1. Say my wife and I we have an argument right now. I'm a 10, I'm a 1, she's a 1. Do I say, hey, honey, I'm going out of the room so I can come back down, or you got to meet me at a 10? Like, so you have to, it's like, do you ask questions like, why do you feel that way, or what is it that offends you? Is that sort of the path that you take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so when we work in our dual diagnosis setting, we have a lot of patients that are, let's say, detoxing from drugs or alcohol. So they can be very irritable. They can feel not good physiologically or psychologically or both. And so we get a lot of anger and a lot of high level, frenetic sort of energy. And so I always tell my staff, do not say to them, calm down, unless you might want to get socked in the face, because no one ever wants to be upregulated. No one wants to be super angry or super defensive or super sad, right? Or super reactionary. It's not a chosen space. Like we don't choose to be there. So to your question about asking questions, like when someone's really upregulated, like they're 10 out of 10, which you know what your partner's 10 out of 10, or even 8, 9, or 10 looks like, it feels like. Right. So instead of they can't really answer a lot of questions because they're not in the thinking part of their brain. They're in fight or flight, or fright or freeze, or FU, right? Is the other one I always say, right? They're in a state that is not cognitive, right? So the words can come later. The questions of I'm really curious why you felt that way. That can come later. But when they're really escalated, it's really about you helping to calm their nervous system, which means you have to calm yourself, your own nervous system first, right? So good deep breaths. Your question, Rob, about do I say I'm going out of the room? I really recommend that couples have what I call rules of engagement. So you figure these out when you're not in conflict. Okay, so in a time you're feeling connected, I don't know, over a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever, to what are your no-go zones? So it might be name calling. It might be raising of your voice. It might be slamming a door. I mean, we don't know. You can't assume to know what your partner's no-goes are. So, and often it comes from family of origins or other relationships, or just their temperament. And these are absolute do nots during conflict, because conflict is absolutely inevitable. Fighting is a choice, right? So there's a conflict is great. I so fully support healthy conflict, but fighting can cause harm. It does cause harm, right? So being curious about so having your rules of engagement, which you figure out beforehand, and then following them. And if you screw up and break a rule of engagement, that is on you to massively own, wow, I botched that, I broke our rule, I am so very sorry, right? It gives you a chance to be fully personally responsible and accountable there. And then the repair and restore is after the conflict. How do you reconnect, right? How do you put deposits back into the bank of connection instead of taking out withdrawals, right? And so that might be having a conversation about it. It might be just holding each other. It might be going out for a walk together. You also figure out, how do you want to repair and restore? And you do this not in conflict times.
Right.
So these are, and this is, think about that. That is the definition of intimacy. How do you have really 10 out of 10 conversations with someone and come back together as a unit? And one of the things I love about metaphors, and I can't remember who said it, but instead of thinking of I was a tennis player, so instead of thinking of you and your spouse or your partner on opposite sides of the court, lobbing the fighting ball back and forth, it's actually the two of you on the same side of the court, and the issue or the challenge as your opponent, right, on the other side. Oh,
I love that.
So how do you stay on the same side of the court, right? And so it's just a metaphor for me that's really stuck with me of am I looking at my partner as the opponent, or am I looking at the challenge that we're facing as the opponent?
Yeah, that's profound. I love that. I totally love that, being on the same side and the issue being the opponent. Love that. So I want to share one thing I want you to share. I guess we can share with the audience here. When I met you in Dallas, we had a breakout session, and you had about 10 or 12 of us sitting around the table, and you had us all stand up, and we stand there, and not everybody knew everybody. So I didn't know anybody there the first time there. And you asked us to stand up, and we had to stare in a person's eyes for 3 minutes. I think you had it, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk about the purpose of that or the reason for that? Because I know there's intimacy there, but I mean, you're not going to be intimate with that person right out of the gate, but you got to learn there's something behind that. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite practices. So when you asked about practices, I said breath work, right? And brain curiosity. Another practice. This is not a beginner practice. Well, so the beginner practice would be with your spouse. It's called eye gazing, and it is a non-verbal, so it's a somatic, means of the body practice for deeper connection. Okay. And it's very awkward for most people when they're first doing it. I had you guys doing it and you were strangers, right? Because I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned that one of the teachers, big teachers in this space, she says that we usually only eye gaze with someone when we want to fight them or you know what them. Right. And so the idea is with your partner, this is not about sexual intimacy. This is about deep connection, because it's non-sexual. So like in a moment when you're feeling connected, the practice would be you literally set a timer on your phone, and this also calms your nervous system because you don't think you're going to be staring into each other's eyes in perpetuity. But you set a timer, let's say for 2 minutes or 3 minutes. That would be the most I would do. And you literally just look into each other's eyes softly, right? You're not staring. You're softly looking into each other's eyes with no words. Okay, it will feel awkward. You'll find that you're like want to laugh or you want to look away, or maybe emotion comes up or you're holding your breath, and you just keep breathing and you look into your partner's eyes. The idea is it is literally the definition of intimacy, to see and be seen. And that does not have to do with words. That is a deeper connection, right? They say the eyes are the window to the soul, right? So you get to see. You see your partner. You might see their pain. You might see their beauty. You might see their hurt. The advanced practice is to do it when you're in conflict, and then you might see their anger. You might see their defensiveness, right? But it cuts through the story and the words and the patterns that relationships can form, that couples can form, the conflict patterns, and you start to see your partner's humanity. You start to see also their divinity, right? You start to see the divine in them as a being from God, right? Like it cuts through so much of it. So it's an amazing practice. It's one of my favorite practices. You guys did it as strangers. The practice for your listeners would be to do it with, you can do it with a partner. If you're single, your spouse, if you're single, do it with a really good friend. I mean, because it is not sexual in any way, shape or form. It's about a deep sensual intimacy. And what you guys experienced and a lot of you shared in Dallas is that there was a moment where we went from like super awkward to much more relaxed. And that's basically what that is neurologically, is your nervous system calming down, right? And so it's really cool to experience that with a partner. So I highly recommend it. If you're going to do this practice when you're connected, when you're feeling connected, 2 or 3 minutes, and then when the alarm goes off, then talk about it. You can laugh and be like, oh my gosh, that was so awkward, or oh my gosh, that was so amazing. Whatever it is, you have a couple minutes where you just share how that was for each of you.
Yeah, that's cool because I remember we were there was 2 guys, like I didn't even know him. Is Eberly or Eberly? And so I didn't know him, he didn't know me, and we're just looking at each other. At first, it's like a standoff, and then the shoulders start to relax a little bit. Yeah. But it's good. So I really appreciate that, because I think I had a moment. I said, man, I don't know when's the last time I gazed in my wife's eyes for 3 minutes.
You did, sure. It was so beautiful.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And I'm like, I got home. I said, I told my wife we're gonna do it. We haven't done it yet. I'm like, I got to do this.
Now you're gonna do it.
Yeah. Everybody's gonna hear this, and they're gonna, Rob, did you stare into your wife's eyes yet? And then my wife said, no, he hasn't. And I'm like, yes, I have.
It's a really beautiful. I've done it with my son. It's a really beautiful practice. Someone asked me about doing it with an adult child, and I would say you just use your guidance, but it can be with anyone that you're wanting to deepen that relationship with. But what I will say is that you will see them in a different way, and it's really right. Intimacy is into me see, right? You're really giving someone you're giving what a sacred space, what a beautiful space. You're giving your partner time to literally just look upon you and for you to look upon them with no words, right?
Wow. Yeah, like I was thinking about my wife, but I didn't think about having that 3-minute stare down, if you will, with my kids. How powerful would that be? I get a little emotional just thinking about it, because I could imagine where we're to go, even though there's no conversation. But I could see the tears flowing, because I could just see like the history of me raising the kids, and maybe the heads we butted and the good times we had, and I could just envision all that as I'm staring into his or her eyes. Right. And I like that. That's a takeaway for me today, to do that with the kids. It'd be awkward, but
it's totally awkward. My son was like, "This is the worst 3 minutes of my life,"
That's great.
But what I felt was I saw such depth in him that I hadn't seen in that way before. That was my experience with him. I don't know what his experience was with me, but that was my experience with him. So.
And I think that's the key, seeing the depth in others. I love that. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
So as we finish up here, I got to ask you this question, and I'm going to ask it a different way. I usually ask it one way, but I'm going to ask it a different way. Where else in your life, or how much more chiseling do you think you have going on in your life?
Oh my God. Ooh, I just got full body chills. I love the name of this podcast. As you know, I was like enamored from the moment I heard it, because I really believe, I love the idea of starting with a piece of like rock, maybe even muddy rock, and coming out with this gorgeous sculpture, right? This unique work of art, one in a million work of art. And we are all literally completely unique. How cool is that? Even our thumbprints. It's just so cool that how unique we all are, God-given gift of uniqueness. So long-winded way of saying, I think there's a lot of chiseling left in my life, and it feels really, at 42, I decided to change careers again and do the intimacy coaching. I'm in a new phase with my son being off to college, an empty nester, and kind of living in Costa Rica and Utah. So blessed to be in these two fabulous places where I feel so much nature and so close to God. And I think, just professionally, like really finding, I used to think my parts were all these parts of my journey were separate. And now I realize that they are all like part of the chiseling, right? They were like taking off this hunk of rock and taking off this hunk of rock, but not because it needed to go. It needed to actually happen to expose the statue beneath.
Yeah, like the evolution of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So Stormy, if people wanted to get a hold of you, how could they do that?
Yeah, I think the best way is if you want to learn more about the coaching or the online programs that we have, would be www.lovedeeperlab.com. That's my website. My email, you can email me any questions. I love this stuff. I just definitely email me if you have any questions. It's stormy@lovedeeplab.com. And then on Instagram at DocStormy, DocStormy1, DocStormy1.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Stormy. It's been awesome. It's been a pleasure for me to sit here and chat with you and to help. I'm sure you're impacting a lot of people, because I'm sure people have a ton of questions because they go through this.
Yeah.
And I just think it's awesome, and you're doing an awesome thing for people out there. And it was a pleasure for me to meet you in Dallas, and now we're connected.
Too.
And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with you. And any final words before I let you go?
Well, I think if people want to continue the work of the intimacy, they can shoot me that email, and I'll send you an intimacy guide that can help you kind of guide your way through it. Also has a meditation and a video on it if you're wanting to look at more deeply at the realms of intimacy. So
that's awesome. So if you heard that, send her an email, or if you can't remember what it was, I'll have it in notes. I'll give it to people. And Stormy will get that out to you. So Stormy, thank you again so much. I'm honored and privileged. Yeah, thank you. And until next time, everybody, let's go get chiseled.